He was born into royalty, yet died in exile. He once ruled from a palace of marble, but died in a mud house in Rangoon. He had 22 sons, 32 daughters, 4 wives, and numerous concubines. He lost them all. This isn't a Shakespearean tragedy written by a poet. This is the life of a poet king. Bahadur Shah Zafar, the last emperor of the Mughal dynasty, and quite possibly the unluckiest ruler in human history. The Mughal Empire once stretched across most of the Indian subcontinent. Its rulers commanded armies, built wonders like the Taj Mahal, and lived like gods on earth. They controlled 23% of the world GDP. But by 1837, when Zafar took the throne, that empire was a ghost of its former self. The British East India Company controlled almost everything. The emperor? Just a figurehead in Delhi's Red Fort. But Zafar still lived well. In a palace lined with red sandstone and poetry, he hosted musharas, poetry gatherings that filled the air with verse and wine. He painted, wrote ghazals, flirted with mysticism. His court was a cultural salon attracting artists, musicians, and thinkers from all over the subcontinent. Sure, the empire was crumbling outside, but inside the Red Fort, it was still golden. Zafar wasn't a warrior. He was a poet, a mystic, and he was a damn good poet, and we will share some of his gut-wrenching verses so you can be the judge. He preferred verses to guns, more roomy than Rambo. But the good times didn't last. In 1857, a fire engulfed the Indian subcontinent, and the peaceful life of the last king was set aflame. On May 12th, rebellious local soldiers from the East India Company entered Delhi. They marched into the Red Fort and said, "You're our leader now." Zafar blinked. Me? He had no army, no resources, no plan, but they insisted. They needed his name, his title, his crown. And so, reluctantly, Zafar became the symbolic leader of India's first war of independence, an old poet pushed into a revolution. Just 4 days later, 52 European civilians, including women and children hiding in Delhi, were discovered and executed under a peepal tree outside Zafar's palace. Zafar begged the soldiers to stop, but they ignored him. They wanted to implicate the king fully, and they succeeded. He had no real control over the revolution. His son, Mirza Mughal, was named commander, but the soldiers rejected him. No one listened. No one obeyed. Delhi fell into chaos. Food ran out. It wasn't a revolution, more a group project where no one read the instructions. The British Empire called it a mutiny. But for those who fought and died, it was a war for liberation against a foreign power that had bled the land dry. And then came the real horror. British vengeance was savage. Thousands were executed without trial. Rebels were tied to cannons and blown apart. Villages suspected of sympathy were razed. Even women and children were not spared. No mercy, no humanity, only punishment. Delhi, the heart of the rebellion, was taken back in September. When the British retook Delhi, they did so with rage in their hearts. They ransacked the Red Fort. They massacred entire neighborhoods. And Bahadur Shah Zafar, the emperor of Hindustan, fled, not to an army, not to allies, but to the tomb of his great-grandfather. A graveyard became his final refuge. Zafar's sons, Mirza Mughal, Mirza Khizr Sultan, and Mirza Abu Bakr, were captured after the fall of Delhi. These young princes had taken minor roles in organizing the rebellion in the capital. But they were not battle-hardened soldiers, just symbols of a fallen dynasty. They surrendered under the promise of safety by the British officer Major William Hodson. But promises meant nothing to the British now. On September 22, 1857, near Kuni Darwaza, the Gate of Blood, Hodson ordered all 3 sons to strip naked before a jeering crowd. Then, one by one, he shot them in the head. Executed without trial, without mercy, their blood spilled into the dirt of their own capital. Their bodies were thrown onto a bullock cart, paraded through the streets of Delhi as a warning. Then their bodies were hanged on the gates of Delhi, citizens forced to watch the corpses of their princes rot in public. Bahadur Shah Zafar, once emperor of a vast realm, was found hiding in Humayun's tomb days later, not with an army, not with dignity, but as an old, frail man sitting in a dusty corner. The British dragged him out like a thief. They paraded him through the ruins of his city, past the corpses of his sons, past the walls of the Red Fort that had once echoed with poetry and song, now blackened with smoke and blood. Zafar was so devastated he couldn't even react. The man who had once written verses of beauty was now watching the slow-motion burial of his dynasty. And then came the final humiliation, exile. The British promised mercy. What they delivered was a bullock cart to Rangoon. No palanquin, no farewell, just a king, evicted from the very empire his family had ruled for centuries. In Rangoon, Zafar lived in a worn-down home under constant surveillance. Drugged on opium, the Mughal escape of choice. A few of his family members survived the fallout. Among them, one of his last surviving sons, Mirza Jawan Bakht. Zafar had pinned what little hope he had left on this boy. The prince would carry forward the name of the Mughals. The boy fell in love with a Burmese woman, a local ordinary girl, foreign in tongue, dress, faith, and tradition. In any other life, it might have been a beautiful love story. But for Bahadur Shah Zafar, it was a dagger to the chest. He saw more than romance. He saw the death of an identity. Zafar wept, not because the woman was unworthy, but because she was not of Delhi, not of the lineage, not of Hindustan. His son's heart had gone to a land that was not his own, and so too with the future of his family. The Mughals were no longer rulers. Now they were to become ordinary men in a foreign land, fading into history. After that day, Zafar wrote less, spoke less. As if something inside him had finally collapsed. He had survived war, exile, and the execution of his sons. But this quiet surrender to time was perhaps the deepest sorrow of all. And on 7th November 1862, Bahadur Shah Zafar died, alone, in a foreign land, far from everything he loved. The British didn't allow a proper ceremony, no royal funeral, no marble tomb. He was buried in secret, under a small patch of earth. No markings, just a name scribbled in a logbook. At the end of his life, Zafar wrote the following poem in his cell in Rangoon. My heart has no repose in this despoiled land. Who has ever felt fulfilled in this futile world? The nightingale complains about neither the sentinel nor the hunter. Fate had decreed imprisonment during the harvest of spring. Tell these longings to go dwell elsewhere. What space is there for them in this besmirched heart? Sitting on a branch of flowers, the nightingale rejoices. It has strewn thorns in the garden of my heart. I asked for a long life. I received 4 days. 2 passed in desire, 2 in waiting. The days of life are over. Evening has fallen. I shall sleep, legs outstretched in my tomb. How unfortunate is Zafar! For his burial, not even 2 yards of land were to be had in the land of his beloved. Every episode on this channel uncovers the untold stories of people who seemed cursed by fate. Stories that deserve to be remembered, not buried in the footnotes of history. So, if you're fascinated by the lives that history nearly forgot, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Join me as we continue exploring the lives of the unluckiest people in history.